to Coatings Decoded. I am Mark Thomas with Tnemec Company. In today's episode, we're going to talk about sustainable design projects and what contractors need to know, including the types of environmental rating systems they're likely to encounter, the documentation that they'll need, and some of the how-to tips to make sure that it goes smoothly. I'm joined by Jennifer Gleesberg. Jennifer is part of our inside sales team here at Tnemec Company. She's a lead green associate, a CSI construction document technologist, and NACE Level 1 certified. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me today.
Okay, so we know the past 20 years or so, there have been a lot more of these green projects that are being built and designed. And there are now a lot of different types of green building design platforms and rating systems. And you get involved in a lot of these with your career here at Tnemec. What type are you most likely to see or encounter as far as a coatings manufacturer goes?
It seems like the most project questions that come across my desk are for the LEED for version 4.1 rating system. That's the most common that I see. And then I also see the Living Building Challenge Red List as a rating system, the Well Building Standard rating system. And then there's a Collaborative for High Performance Schools CHIPS rating system. And then I also get some Cal Green questions that come across my desk.
So it sounds like LEED projects are by far the most commonly encountered, and we're going to throw a lot of acronyms out today. LEED is Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design, and that is really one of the leaders in these green building design rating systems that's been around for over 20 years now and is very commonly encountered. And it sounded like maybe the second that we at least get involved in is Living Building Challenge. Sometimes that's LBC is the acronym that's used. We'll talk about both of those, even though there are some other ones, and you had mentioned a few others that they could encounter. But I think probably LEED and Living Building Challenge, from what you say, are probably the two to concentrate on.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so let's say that a coatings applicator successfully bid and got a LEED project. What are the first things they need to be aware of when encountering, before they get on site, before they start applying? What do they need to be aware of?
So they need to be aware or make sure that they research. Typically, you might see that the products that are specified meet the Living Building Challenge or the LEED requirements for paints and coatings, but that isn't always true. So what they should look out for is researching, if the manufacturer of the coatings that they're bidding on meet the requirements. So that means, do they have the testing that is required? And we'll kind of go into that testing here, I think, today. What if the VOCs meet the requirements as well? And then if there's any paperwork that the manufacturer has that they need to submit when they're through the bidding process.
So coating projects or products have to be qualified to be used on a LEED project. And you would assume that the specification has already pre-qualified those, that the specification is correct. But of course, it's always good to look through that very carefully to make sure that what you're bidding on and what you'll be using on that project is indeed a certified or a qualified product.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so you mentioned some of the testing. What's some of the testing that would qualify a product for a LEED project?
So there is a few credits within LEED that point to paints and coatings. One is the Indoor Environmental Quality Low Emitting Materials credit. And that requires that paints and coatings meet the VOC requirements of either CARB, SEM, or South Coast Air Quality Maintenance District. And the specific rules will be stated in the specification requirements for the LEED project. And then also the California Department of Public Health emissions testing. You might hear it called CDPH emissions testing. So those are two things that you want to verify that the products that you're betting on or that are specified need to have in order to qualify.
Okay. And is there a specific test with the CDPH that they need to look for?
Yeah, the version 1.2-2017 is the newest version. So there are some differences from the previous versions of that LEED pointed to, with like LEED version 4 versus LEED version 4.1. So you want to make sure that you're requesting the proper documentation from the manufacturer as far as what the requirements of the project are.
So not only ensuring that the specification's correct before you're bidding on those projects or those products, once you actually successfully get the projects, making sure the documentation is all outlined. And I would imagine that most manufacturers are going to list that they have meet a certain emissions test on their product documents, would they not?
Yeah, you would typically see that the manufacturer would have some sort of documentation, paperwork, lead information sheet that outlined, the particular product, whether it met the emissions testing, what the VOC requirements are, and things of that nature.
Okay. So let's assume that you've got all the documentation for VOC, their compliant products for that project, all of that squared away. What other documentation might they be asked for?
They might also be asked for environmental product declarations, which is more of a life cycle assessment of your product. A health product declaration, which you might hear environmental product declarations be an acronym EPD, and then the health product declarations, which is HPD, is the acronym for that. And the health product declarations, we hear a little more in our line of work with the paints and coatings, just because it's more of a recipe per se of what ingredients are in your paints and coatings. So those are two things that often get asked for when you're talking about like LEED materials reporting forms that come across my desk every day. They're looking for the HPDs, EPDs. They're also asking for recycled content, because there's credits within LEED that look at recycled content as an option for, earning a credit, as well as raw material extraction, and so just some other things that you might want to look for, because those are going to be asked for, and coating manufacturers might actually have them.
So the health product declarations, the environmental product declarations, those are documents related to the products being used in the built environment. And I think that just my own experience with these types of building projects is that it's really encouraging transparency and information exchange between what is being installed or applied within a building and what those things are made of. Are there any health considerations that need to go into it? Are those recycled materials? So I think it's all a drive to really try to be more transparent and informative as to what kind of materials are being used in that building. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. And I might want to point out too that the requirements for the health product declarations and environmental product declarations are that you have to have 20 permanently installed products that are used on the project, and those EPDs and HPDs have to come from 5 different manufacturers. So keep in mind that you could use products, paints and coatings, or other products on your project as long as you met that requirement of the 20 from 5 different manufacturers that have those EPDs and HPDs. You could use other products on the project.
So just to clarify that a bit, the emissions test, the VOC requirements are absolutely required for that, the coatings products to be compliant for use in that building. However, coatings manufacturers or the coating products don't necessarily have to have an EPD or an HPD to be used. They're just, if you can get that, or the architect can get that from other manufacturers, those coating products could still be used on the project.
Yeah, yep, that's correct. If they're wanting to use the those credits, which one is for building product disclosure and optimization, the environmental product declarations, and then the building product disclosure and optimization, which is the material ingredient reporting, which is the health product declarations, then you're going to look for products that meet those requirements. But keep in mind that if they can fulfill those requirements, then they you might still be able to use other products on the project.
So we know that mistakes happen in building projects. They never go flawlessly. What would happen if, whether it's through a substitution request that's approved or just inadvertently a product that's not compliant for LEED buildings is used in a project? Are there any alternatives, or does that have to be removed?
Yeah, there are some alternatives. One is to use a VOC budgeting form that can be found online. And I'm not saying that always works, but I have heard that can be used in certain instances where, you come in, to a project and realize that, shoot, we used a product that may not be applicable because it doesn't have the right VOC, or it doesn't have the emissions testing. So that VOC budgeting form can, you just basically lay out what was used on the project and provide the, volume, the VOCs, and then it'll give you like a baseline scenario on if that budgeting will work for your project or not. So that's definitely an option after the fact. Or if maybe it happens where you realize after it's applied, but there might be an instance where you're catching it before that application. And I would say reach out to the product manufacturer and find out if they have a compliant product that you can switch out or that can be substituted, to meet those requirements.
So it sounds like if you were to go the VOC budgeting route, it would really only help you if you used a non-compliant product in a small portion of the building, or, if you applied 1,000 gallons and 50 were non-compliant, it might help you out there, but it's not going to, if everything's non-compliant or a vast majority of the coatings that were applied are non-compliant, it doesn't sound like it's going to help you much.
Yeah. I honestly haven't seen it necessarily the outcome of that, but I have heard on several projects that has been used as an option. So
there are a couple little areas that you might be able to maneuver if there's some products like that shouldn't have been used on a LEED project. But I think getting all of that documentation and verifying that up front sounds like it's critically important. And then also really watching for substitutions going in there with products that weren't necessarily originally specified, make sure that those would be compliant in case that substitution is approved.
Yes.
Okay, so let's move on to Living Building Challenge. You had mentioned that one as another type of design practice and kind of a rating system that some architects are using. What is the difference between it and a LEED rating system project?
So there are some similarities. There is, instead of credits that LEED points to, the Living Building Challenge points to petals. So they have different petals and requirements within those petals. And one is the petal number 10, which is the red list of chemicals. But there is, and I think it might be petal number 8, but that one is specific to, paints and coatings and the requirements for that. So that also points, just like LEED, to the California Department of Public Health, the CDPH emissions testing. And it really just depends. They have different Living Building Challenge requirements that it really just depends. You might look online to find out which version of the CDPH emissions testing that they're pointing to. But keep in mind, if a manufacturer has the newest version of the testing, then it should, be retroactive to what the previous versions are, because only the requirements only get more stringent, as the rating systems get developed. But as far as the red list of chemicals, that's a very stringent list of chemicals, ingredients that cannot be in your coatings. So that really, really takes into effect what can be used as far as paints and coatings on a Living Building Challenge or LBC red list project.
So it sounds like the LEED projects have many more products that would potentially be compliant versus a living building challenge. That's going to be a much smaller group of products that most manufacturers will have to offer that would be compliant for a living building challenge project.
Yeah, because there's things like epoxy resin or formaldehyde that are ingredients that cannot be, that are, listed on that red list that cannot be in your products. So that really depletes the, the paints and coatings that can be utilized. So that means any epoxies, you might have some polyurethanes that can be used, but it really, really depletes what you're able to specify on an LBC project.
Okay. So it sounds like even more so that if you're a coatings contractor, you're reviewing the specification for a living building challenge project, you want to make sure that those products are compliant, of course, but also if it's a smaller group of products that can be used, you may have some atypical or unusual systems as far as primers and intermediates and top coats. And if that's the case, of course, you'd want to take a look and see if there are any special recoat windows or cure times or anything that's unusual, because it sounds like the smaller your portfolio of products that could be used on a living building challenge is, the more unusual those products might become.
Yeah, that's true. As a paint manufacturer ourselves, we know that, we have to make systems that we maybe not otherwise would have utilized, but still are very high performing, good systems as far as the products that are being used to meet those living building challenge requirements. And the neat thing about Living Building Challenge is that they, on their website at livingfuture.org, they are very apt to put the products and specifics on the project that were, used on those Living Building Challenge projects. So that really highlights if you're looking to do or work on a living building challenge project, to see what products have been utilized out there and to find out what manufacturers could meet those requirements.
Okay. And with the proliferation of all of these green building design philosophies, what's that done to coating technology over the years?
It's made coating manufacturers, work on their formulations, lower VOCs, really, work on the water-based side technology-wise and higher solids content. Not necessarily, taking anything away from our existing high-performing, long-lasting, life cycle products, but really just diving down into what the formulation is and how we can better formulate our products to meet these, ever-changing requirements.
Okay, so it sounds like with the proliferation of these green building rating system design philosophies like LEED and Living Building Challenge, it's driven a lot of new technology into the market. Formulators are adjusting the way they're approaching coating formulations, make sure they're compliant, still high performance. Is there anything that a contractor needs to know from a practical standpoint about these products as far as application characteristics or cure times or anything from the applicator's perspective that they need to pay particular attention to?
Yeah, that's a good question. From that aspect, I would just make sure that you're paying attention to, thinning requirements. Also, what maybe there's if there's an accelerator, if there's certain colorants that come into play. Those types of things could affect, the VOCs if you thin too much. Anything like that could affect, what the requirements of the LEED or Living Building Challenge or any of these environmental rating systems requirements are. And you just need to be mindful. Always best, maybe if you're working on a project like that, you reach out to your local coatings representative to ensure that whatever you're doing on that project with that particular product or system is going to still meet the requirements. Or else you can, also look at our performance or product data sheets as well. So
it sounds like if the product itself shows up in its container and it's compliant for use, you've got to be, as the addition of thinner, accelerators, maybe field pigments could throw that to where it's non-compliant anymore. And I would imagine that a lot of these architects, they're trying to gain as many credits as they can to achieve their green building goals. And so they're probably just wanting to make sure that if paints and coatings is one area that they can achieve some points and some credits, they want to make sure they get those and they don't want to be thrown out because of something that was done in the field.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've heard it before or seen it come across my desk, and you always want to cover those, cross those bridges before there's an issue at the end. So
yeah. Okay. Well, we talked about leadership in energy and environmental design, and that would entail the CDPH emissions testing, and also so you want to make sure that documentation is with you before you bid and certainly before you apply, make sure everything's compliant. But you also might be asked for a health product declaration, HPD, an environmental product declaration, an EPD. Those are not required necessarily for coatings, but it is a way for an architect to get some additional credits if a coatings manufacturer might have those available. And then we talked about the living building challenge, and that points back to the emissions testing as well, but it's a much more onerous list of prohibited raw materials that a formulation can utilize. So much smaller group of products that you might be able to select from for a living building challenge project.
Yeah, I would just like to say to just if you're a contractor out there and you're working on any of these environmental rating systems and you have forms that get sent to you from an architect, a consultant working for the project team, and you're not sure of what to do, send those on to your coating manufacturers, and they'll be able to fill out those forms for you or point you in the right direction.
All right, great advice. Well, Jennifer, thank you very much for joining us. Hopefully this was helpful for the contractors listening in. Obviously, if we can be of any assistance, contact your Tnemec representative. We're happy to help you out. Thanks a lot.
Thanks.